for another poet, and they're the ones that make sure that programming through the laureateship can happen throughout the state. So my thanks to them for giving me the position to hold on to for 4 years and helping create events like this. Oh, go back. So thinking about the America's 250th birthday this year and how everybody across the nation is looking back on the story of their state in particular. So thinking about Kansas, it's not going to be 250 years of poetry, I admit. It's only about 100. But I wanted to move back and forth as we think about the story of our state and how the story of our state makes it to other people and how we know the story of our state that we tell ourselves. I was really drawn to thinking about the way the land shows up in people's poetry. There's an idea of Kansas as a flat state that's a drive-through state, a flyover state, but we do have a lot of really interesting and very different geographies happening. And I think that shows up from all of the poets and the way they write about front yards and backyards to all of the various geographies we have going on. Um, and I wanted to think about how does place set us up for the story that we tell of ourselves and where we live. And again, ideally, you have a pen handy and don't mind doing the writing exercises that were prepared in the handout. And if you don't want to do them, I am not going to bully you into it. I'm not going to make you turn in your homework. But there is an opportunity at the end of the talk where you will be invited to submit a poem or a short piece, a story, to share with the state libraries of Kansas so we can get people's poetic take on the story of Kansas and the particular part of Kansas, which one of the 105 counties that you are in. So, again, you won't be obligated to do it, but hopefully you will want to join us in writing your own story of the place of our state of Kansas. So, what that looks like, I think it's helpful, or as a teacher, I always want to tell everybody what we're doing with our time together, so and have it up on the board so everybody knows what we're up to. So, we're gonna do a few things. We're going to do a Kansas poetry quiz from your packet, and then I'm gonna do a reading of two poets. And then we'll do another writing activity, two more poets, a writing activity, and two more poets. And I sort of like to do that sort of interactive thing because I'm a teacher. Um, I will ask if people want to read some of those poems out loud. I welcome that, but I'm aware not everybody might be in a situation where they can unmute. I know we also have a library or two in the chat, and so that might be with a viewing group and unable to chat in that way. But I would really like for this to feel like a conversation rather than a lecture. So I believe if you do have your packets handy, um, you will have the first piece, which is a quiz in which there are no wrong answers. It is, Ray put the link in the chat if you need to have access to it again. Um, and the quote I have up here while you answer those few quick questions is this quote from the quintessential Kansas text, The Wizard of Oz, in which Dorothy Gale says, "It wasn't a dream, it was a place." And so all of the activities or all of the answers on the quiz are meant to feel a little bit dreamlike and fantastical because I think I've seen some otherworldly things in some of the storms I have seen in Kansas. And so I think there can be some dreamlike or beautiful lyrical qualities to the landscape and the skyscape. And so the poetry quiz, which you cannot answer incorrectly, is there to help you feel a little bit dreamy about the place that we are in. just do one more minute of being quiet to let you work. But if you get a quiz answer you like, if you want to put it in the chat, it would be nice to see some of the connections and responses people are making out there in the world. All right, no takers on the chat so far. But I hope many or most people out there were able to do that opening poetry quiz and start feeling those slippery, interesting leaps and connections that poetry is so known for. Um, Poetry is one of the things it's known for are those dreamlike lyrical connections and qualities. And sometimes they come to us quite magically on their own, and other times right, a quiz, believe it or not, like that can maybe help us make those kinds of connections. So maybe we can, ooh, maple helicopters. Thank you. Oh, I love that answer. Oh, see, I am getting friends chatting in. What falls most often from the sky? Sunshine. That's beautiful, Monica. Thank you. Oops, good grief. Okay. So thinking about how place has personality, we did our quiz, but again, they're just like there's not a wrong personality to have. Some of us are introverts or extroverts or nature lovers or crafters or whatever it is that we are. None of that's wrong. And just like our landscapes, it all has personality, and we might be living in a hillier part of the state or a flatter part of the state, an urban part of the state or rural part of the state, but it's all just part of that personality that can come out. Um, so I just wanted to chat before I jumped in on talking about our first two poets. I did want to tell you the six poets we're going to look at tonight, fairly briefly in order to be able to read six poems. But Mae Williams Ward was born in Missouri, but spent most of her life in Belpre, Kansas, which is sort of like central Kansas. William Stafford was born in Hutch in 1914. Gwendolyn Brooks was born in Topeka in 1917. Langston Hughes spent his childhood in Lawrence. Denise Lowe, oh, I didn't write down where Denise and Huascar were or are, but it also ended with, so I started more historical, about 100 people publishing about 100 years ago. I moved into some of our, Denise Lowe, who was our first poet laureate, Huascar, who preceded me as laureate, so that we move into some of our living Kansas poets at the end of the talk and thinking about how they represent the state. But I did try and get poets at different points in history and also from different parts of Kansas so that the way they might write about place and represent place might feel a little bit different. So this one by Mae Williams Ward. So she was a mid 20th century poet at a time when a lot of deep image poets were writing, and there's a lot more distillation and smaller poems that capture distilled moments, and that I think this poem does quite well. Does anybody with a warmed up diaphragm want to raise their hands or unmute and read the poem out loud for us? It's nice and short, so you aren't on the hook for long. Ryan, thank you. I'd love to have you unmute and read the poem.
Tornado by Mae Williams Ward. Leaves stood still and our hearts stood still, but he was sky and a boil with clouds, a coppery rack and the greenish black of shrouds. We dove for shelter and none too soon. The universe swayed and swirled. The monstrous horn of a unicorn gored the world.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm gonna do poetry snaps because that's how we do it in class too. So, people are chiming in on the chat a little bit, so I'd like to invite people to continue to use the chat. And what I'd like to see in the chat and hear from you about is what lines give you pleasure. I always talk to my students about how poems really want to touch our heart, mind, and ear. So usually there's something, just like in painting, you might be looking at color or line or shape. Our version of that in poetry is heart and mind and ear, where you feel something, where you think something, where your earballs get a little tickle and you're like, ooh, I like the sound of that. But if you would put a line in there that gave you pleasure, that you enjoyed, um, the monstrous horn of the unicorn. Yes, visceral, enigmatic. The universe swayed and swirled. That one's tickling my earballs. I like that with the sway and swirl because it's not just alliterative. You have like a couple letters next to each other shimmering and adding that beautiful sound. Leaves stood still and our hearts stood still. Yeah. What a way to begin is in that stillness. And if you also know like the Midwestern sky and also the title, you know what might be about to happen. Also, I love that you said, Lindsay, what a hook, because I also know the formation of the tornado is in the hook echo, is when the shape starts to curve, but that's what that's called.
I didn't know that. That's delightful.
I took my son was very anxious about storms, so I took him to a lot of storm chasing classes. I thought knowledge would make him less afraid. I was wrong, but I learned some cool things in the meantime. I also love with the monstrous horn of the unicorn. What I love about that too is so often I think what makes a poem shimmer, and makes it memorable and beautiful and makes us wonder more about it or has it live inside of us is when there's something seemingly contradictory to it as well. So like the monstrous horn of the unicorn, we think of unicorns as innocent and or maybe it's a Lisa Frank unicorn and it's all bright and neon and has big purple eyes or something, but we think of it as like a happy or joyful or innocent thing. But then the monstrous horn, so putting the monster and the unicorn next to each other in a few words, I think just really gives it an interesting tension. And like, I think this is messing with the line breaks a little, but I think this poem is like 7 lines. Here it's 8. But that in such few lines, you could capture music and imagery and an interesting tension of like both the kind of the sublime experience of a tornado, both the beauty or like the power of that, and also like the eerie, strange loveliness of that. I know an electrical storm I went through in Western Kansas is something I never hope to experience again, but is one of the most profound images on the back of my brain, because it was sublime, by which I mean terrifying, and also gorgeous, somehow too. So we'll go on to our next Kansas poet, who is William Stafford. Oh, good grief. My slide advancement practice could use some help. Which is actually the one I picked was titled Across Kansas, so I had to use it. But thinking about it, it's about a road trip. I don't think there's anything that might trip anyone up. Does anybody else with a warmed up diaphragm want to raise their hand and possibly read the poem aloud for us? Monica, I see your hand. Monica, would you unmute and read this poem aloud for us?
So, Across Kansas by William Stafford. My family slept those level miles, but like a bell rung deep till dawn, I drove down an aisle of sound. Nothing real but in the bell, past the town where I was born. Once you cross a land like that, you owe your face more. What the light struck told itself. Every rock denied all the rest of the world. We stopped at Sharon Springs and ate. My state still dark, my dream too long to tell.
Thank you, Monica. We need one of the emoji reactions to be a finger snap, which I don't think that the emoji keyboard designers have given us yet, but those would be bubbling up if we had them. So just like last time, I want to know what tickles your heart or tickles your mind or tickles your ears. In this piece, what's the line? If you had to get a line temporarily tattooed on your arm, which one would it be? What's the line that I drove down an aisle of sound? Yeah, that is okay. Yes, that's so good. I drove down an aisle of sound. That's so beautiful. It gives us an image, but also something I can't quite grasp of what is the aisle of sound. I can see the long road, but what the sound is, my state still dark, my dream too long to tell. It's a beautiful ending and a beautiful pairing too. The state is dark and the dream is too long to tell. You own your face more. What does that mean to own your face more? I want to keep thinking about that. That's a mind one for me. And the Isle of Sound is my ears a lot. And hmm, I think the ending might be a hard one for me because I think I'm feeling there, but it also is a thinker for me. But one of the things, those level miles, one of the things that this is going to lead us into is thinking about the senses, because we have the family is sleeping, those level miles. So as this road trip is going across Kansas, the bell rung deep till dawn. Oh, I pictured the road as the aisle, but yeah, the road noise, just that hum of the wheels on the road, through an aisle of sound, nothing real but in the bell. But I also am like, is that bell even real? Or like, there's no aisle full of bells. I don't know. Um, but I'm never interested in a 5 paragraph essay. I don't make my students write those about poems. I think that's the meanest thing you can do to a poem. I would never make anyone here do that. Only poetry quizzes where you can only get the right answer. Um, but I also like, we've got images, we've got sounds, and I'm interested in those other characteristics of place. A lot of time we get poems that focus on the image, the things that we can see, and yet smell is the most closely tied to memory. I love writing about food in Kansas and thinking about the flavors of a place. And so for our next writing exercise, where you're going to get me to be quiet for a couple of minutes, um, is the next page in your packet that I called, part of it just says sensory sandbox. Um, Thinking about a sandbox is often where, generative play happens for kids, and sometimes people call sort of brainstorming sessions a sandbox too. But I've just asked you there to write about sensory things that connect you to your everyday life here in the state, and reflect on a few things that you have smelled, tasted, heard, felt, um, today or yesterday, but something that feels a little fresh in your mind, and to sketch out a few of those sensory details, that could be rich material for a poem or story that you might tell about a day in Kansas. Now, be quiet for 2 whole minutes. really quickly, before we move on to our next couple of poets, I just wanted to share with you um, a poor quoting that I'm going to do for you right now, which was the poet John Keats, not a Kansan, but he wrote in a letter to his brother that he said, I still don't know how to work a lake out. Um, that it, oh gosh, okay. I want to make sure I get it right. Um, and I could either do it really badly or see if it quick. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I should have had this handy. But I was just thinking that I'd asked you all to share your pleasures with me, and now I'm going to tell you why. Keats said, I still don't know how to work out a poem. A poem needs understanding through the senses. The point of diving into a lake is not immediately to swim to the shore, but to be in the lake, to luxuriate in the senses. You don't need to work the lake out. It is an experience beyond thought. Poetry soothes and emboldens the soul to accept the mystery. And so I think that for our own making and our own magic as like writing poems in the moment too, the more we can not, write a 5 paragraph essay about poems, the more we can stay in the lake, the easier it is for me to find those lines and those moments that I want to write about. And I try and always hide from my parent side, my to-do list side, my answer side, and stay in my mystery side when I'm trying to write. So I think the senses are also both for our exercise today, and also just maybe for yourselves as people. I think journaling your senses at night is a great way to connect with your day, to reflect on it, and also to kind of stay inside and connected to the experience of your day, which might be the experience of a poem, rather than concluding anything about it, just staying inside the experience, and staying inside the lake. So I like that. I think that about art as well. I just like to go stand in front of art, without ever understanding it, perhaps, and just being inside the lake of it, understanding it through my senses. Okay, so we're gonna keep moving through the century. Oh, another great quote here, by Kevin Young about the senses. And again, because I'm obsessed with food, I think poems return us to that place of mud and dirt and earth, sun and rain, and that's where food comes from. And so there's this common link. So Kevin Young, Topeka poet, reminding us that our senses connect us to both food and to poetry. All right, so we have this Langston Hughes poem, and instead of a landscape, we get perhaps figuratively, and looking at the world, and not specifically of Kansas, but thinking about what does that space open for us? What do we feel closed off from? And sort of the metaphor of landscape and place as well as we look out at the world. Would anybody like to unmute and read this Langston Hughes poem, I Look at the World? Ryan again. Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
Star student.
I Look at the World by Langston Hughes. I look at the world from awakening eyes and a black face, and this is what I see. This fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through the dark eyes and a dark face, and this is what I know, that all these walls oppression builds will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let us hurry, comrades, the road to find.
Thanks, Ryan. What are lines that stand out to you or musical moments? Silly walls. Same, Julie, same. I think it's just a great pairing of words. It's such an unexpected adjective for that noun. And also, I like all of the consonants with all the L's next to each other. with eyes no longer blind, that newly restored vision of what we can see. Once so often we don't know what we don't know, and the ways that our vision can be restored metaphorically in this way. The road to find. Yeah, that's such an interesting inversion of syntax there at the end in order to hit the rhyme. It's very pretty. And this is what I see. Yes. Lindsay, that makes sense. I love something so simple and clear and profound. That sounds like you. Michaela, this fenced off narrow space assigned to me. Yes. It's one of the toughest, also like syllable packs, if that makes sense, in the poem. So it almost feels kind of claustrophobic to me as well. So this is more of an example. It's more metaphorical. Some of the, I mean, I think obviously some of the elements of the Stafford poem were just operating on this metaphorical way, and the tornado, I think, was probably literal, but also certainly the unicorn horn was metaphorical. But thinking also about how the world we look at, the yard we look at, the landscape we look at, might also have these metaphorical implications as we look out at the world, at our state, at our yards, and what we see. In the next poem, we're going to do Gwendolyn Brooks as well. We're also thinking about yards. So thinking also not just those broader Kansas roads and going across the tornado in the landscape, but thinking also about like some of the more immediate, maybe even domestic spaces or urban spaces, more close to us rather than a vista. Hopefully, I was thinking about that when pairing these two poems together. But thinking about our neighbors and our neighborhoods and how that also is place. We can think just about the nature as place, but how our backyards and down the block is a place worth writing about in our poems and telling those stories as well. Would anybody like to unmute and read A Song in the Front Yard by Gwendolyn Brooks? Teacher Paul.
I will.
Ryan. Okay, well, we got Lindsay. We're gonna have Lindsay read it. Go for it, Lindsay.
A Song in the Front Yard by Gwendolyn Brooks. I've stayed in the front yard all my life. I want a peek at the back, where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now, and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. They do have some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine, how they don't have to go in at 9:15. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman, that George will be taken to jail soon or late on account of last winter he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine. Honest, I do. And I'd like to be a bad woman too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace, and strut down the streets with paint on my face.
What are some of your favorite lines in this poem? These two poems also have such different opposite tones and energies to them, but both speak about like communities, which I think, yes, Ryan, me too. A girl gets sick of a rose. I love that. Where the charity children play. Yes, they do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. I was rereading some other Gwendolyn Brooks today, and I just think I don't read her enough because everything I was reading today was just making my heart do cartwheels. It was so good. And I'd like to be a bad woman too. That's something that not enough poems say, honestly. Same girl. I want to wear those brave stockings. So I think this interesting contrast too is thinking about as we tell the stories of our place, and what it brings out in us. That's also kind of interesting. What does place make us see, right? Like in the Langston Hughes, he's like, I see this fenced in place that oppression has built for me. But Brooks is like, I love this yard. Like, I like these back alleys and I like the play and I want to put on stockings and let's go hang out with some weeds. And so I think that's kind of interesting, just thinking about what place brings out in us and what do we see when we look out down our block and in our neighborhoods. What is the story that the Georges of this world and Johnny Mays are telling us? Um, Although, if in your own poem you don't want to say bad things about your neighbors, that's fair and that's fine. You don't have to talk about your neighbors in your Kansas poem if you don't want to. Um, mm, Brian, thanks for that comment too about the contrast of living in your neighborhood back in Oakland. Um, and because do you live sort of out more by nature now too? Yes. So you had more of a neighborhood experience, and now you live not rural exactly, but you live out from the city on like a nature preserve. Um, so the ways in which, yeah, those then a different kind of neighborhood. Then you have turkeys as neighbors, and not in a metaphorical way, just literal turkeys strutting around. My mother's neighbors are a field of dairy cows. I love that. Sometimes we have different kind of neighbors. For a while, I had a mouse neighbor upstairs, but that didn't last too long. Um, all right, so we're gonna get to our next writing prompt here. Um, so thinking about how, there were the literal characters of George and Johnny May, but also it's kind of coming up in our chat now too about the turkeys and the cows. But thinking about, you've got that next prompt, in order to get me to be quiet for 2 more minutes, in which you'll think about seeing the landscape as a character. And you can add things like the cows and the turkeys, but also in that classic literary device we all learned in our ELA classes of personifying things and giving things some human characteristics and behaviors. If you've got some sassy soybeans or whatever is populating your landscape with its own dynamic types of personhood. Um, I'll be quiet for a few minutes and give you a chance just to sketch that down in your journal or in your handout to get a few more details of the character of the place that you live. So my quote before we move on to our next two poets is this one by Walt Whitman, who said that the prairie is America's characteristic landscape. Um, because of, I guess it's democratic grasses. But I really like thinking that when people think of America, they think often about where we are. So even if people might still have some of this, oh, it's all cornfields or incorrect assumptions about the dynamic nature of the place that we live, I also like knowing that for a long time now, people have thought about where we live as this characteristic landscape of the nation. So our next two poets are going to be past poets laureate of the state. Again, Denise Lowe was the first, and I think this is a beautiful poem, bringing us into contemporary living poets. And we will do Huascar Medina next, who again was the poet laureate who preceded me. Would anybody like to raise their hand and volunteer to read this poem aloud? Julie, thank you.
Hello there. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Regret by Denise Lowe. I could not hold your cold hand, so the room retreated underfoot. Now a deer bleats outdoors with the misery of the hunted. Or is it a coyote, the hunter? You remain somewhere else unmoving, not in our bed. Years have passed. I regret I never placed a pint in your casket or tobacco. Ashes collect in my throat instead of your name. I dream of you in powwow regalia, a head roach, pink, white, and blue beaded gauntlets, ribbon shirt, Potawatomi style for your grandfather. You hardly glance at me, too busy in the afterworld and dream world at once. Do we always disappoint? Yes, it is a coyote yowling beyond the wall, a high register bassoon squeal no dog can make. The night ripples curtains with that sound, not tomb silence. Damp fog scents the wind. This poem about you, to you. Does it unsettle ethers, ripple the place where we will next meet? I just visited that spot of earth of goldenrod and lilies. I left you a pint of cherry brandy, tobacco, tears.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Julie. And you know the drill, everybody. Go ahead and pop in the chat a line that sticks with you. A high register bassoon squeal no dog can make. Oh yeah, Monica's there right there with you, Ryan. Look at that. People know I like food, so it's probably not gonna surprise people to know I really like the last line. I want my drink and my smoke at the end. Um, I like those offerings on the earth to those that have gone. The night ripples curtains. Nice. I like that. Such an interesting sort of synesthesia-ish moment of how is the night doing that? It's probably the night breeze, but that sort of compounding of that. Oh, and again, we have twins. This poem is generating, maybe it's the couplets of the poem, but each line keeps coming up twice. Alyssa and Michaela both loving Night Ripples Curtains. Another thing I really quite like um, is, we've read poems that had a lot of nature imagery. We had with the tornado, we have like a night, cross country drive, and then we got a couple of neighborhood poems. But this one's really interesting to me too, because it's also different than everything else we've read. It's grief in a landscape, and how grief and regret, the regrets that come with grief, are very placed in a place, and very rooted in our landscape, and how we can remember people, what is it? Haunting starts at home. We can remember people in the place. We recall seeing them um, dancing outside or making breakfast in the morning. And also so that, visiting that place, spot of earth of goldenrod and lilies, um, and leaving the foods out. So I love that, those places, those things, the flora, the animals howling at night, and how all of the landscape also can be summoning up those that we have lost. Um, yeah, I like Alyssa talking about, in the chat, how the periods and pauses at the end slow down the last three words: Jerry Brando, tobacco, tears, and just like really set that slow weight and rhythm there at the end. Um, I think it's such a stunning ending, um, and how we go from two things to consume to a third that can't be, but all three are tastes essentially. I think that's such a good list. Um, all right, so I'll go on to our next poem. And it's the title of today's talk and our state motto. It's Per Aspera et Astra, by Huascar Medina. I really, really love this one. And I'm happy to read it unless somebody else would like to who hasn't. I'm happy to have Ryan do it again, but also if there's anyone else out there, since we're getting some people are getting braver as we go and feeling more ready to volunteer. So I'm going to give my teacherly pause and see if I get a hand raise. And if not, I will read it. Ah, Ryan, will you read our final poem for us?
I don't want to take it away from you, but I'm happy to read it.
Go for it. I get to talk enough.
All right. Per Aspera et Astra by Huascar Medina. We were lost in the plains, beautiful and ordinary. Sunflowers in the fields, seeds of fallen stars standing tall, deeply rooted in this land. I've admired how our flowers shine, grasping towards the sky, beyond the prairie grass anchored down to earth, mimicking the sun. When a gardener plants the seeds of helianthus, they are performing magic. Raising stars out of the dust where buzzing planets circle, half red moons set, and swarming comets float in orange comas. I've always felt that late at night, in the bed of a truck in a Kansas field, we were at the center of this universe. And I was exactly where I should be, amongst the flowers, not below.
Mm. All right, friends, new and old, pop those lines in the chat that make your heart, mind, or ear happy. Comets float in orange comas. Yeah, I love that. It's so weird and beautiful. Raising stars out of the dust. Yes. Beautiful and ordinary. Yes. That is the plains. Beautiful and ordinary. Seeds of fallen stars. I also really like the buzzing planet circle, because they used to be obsessed with the music of the spheres and the music that the planets must make. But if you've ever heard a star, which we've got recordings of, it just kind of is a low drone that's just constant, and it actually is kind of buzzy, which I think is really interesting. um, in the bed of a truck in a Kansas field, grasping towards the sky. There's so many beautiful moments of image and music here. And thinking about the conversation it's by default having with the poem before it, of thinking I'm exactly where amongst the flowers, not below. This celebration of life, the last one had a lot of was very grief tinged, and here we have this celebration of beauty and of life, even if it's an ordinary beauty in the middle of the fields, in a bed of a truck in a Kansas field. We were at the center of this universe. Also, I'm really drawn to the fact that at that end, too, it's a we, and it feels like maybe it's the we of the poet and somebody else in the bed of the truck. I feel like bed trucks usually only accommodate a couple people, but also I do feel included in that reader we way of like that we're all as readers, in the back of the bed of the truck looking up with the poet. And I really like that too. Angela put in the chat, in the bed of the truck, that line makes me think of my years in high school. And I like too that poetry has that great power to do time travel too, even in just a line, how it can connect us really quickly. Sort of think about a lot of times, I think poems, when they're good too, are sort of like a flower in that there is the hub, which is the line itself, but a lot of times our minds are making the petals that go back into the eye of the daisy as we're reading them. That lines, the buzzing line, I'm like, ooh, and my brain kind of does this loop and then back to the poem. And the orange coma, my brain goes, ooh, and draws a petal in my mind, connecting it in some way, or leaping and enjoying the pleasures of it in that lake that Keats talked about. Not a leap to solve it, but to connect to my own history, my own truck bed memories, my own history of knowing something about the music of the spheres and the planets, but still holding us all in that eye of the daisy, even as the petals go out and loop around as we, dwell on the beauty of each of those lines. Ryan said in the chat, I'm thinking of going to the drive-in theater. Ooh, that's the one. It's west of here. It's by, oh, what's the town? There's one in KC too, I think, but there's Canopolis. Thank you, Allie. Um, in the drive-in theater in Canopolis. I gotta make that on my summer to-do list. That's a good one. Okay. So we'll go forward again. Oh, Um, go. Oh, okay. Ah, um, so for the final writing prompt, which I think you should take longer than 2 minutes to do, but I'm going to do my classic 2 quiet minutes in just a second here. But there is a prompt in the handout that sort of pulls in some of the details that I offered. I kind of, I mentioned the food stuff earlier, but I kind of like doing some of these exercises, the sensory writing, the character writing, the quiz, as sort of putting all the ingredients out on the counter for making dinner. So for me, some of these exercises, this type of play and collecting lines and sensations and memories, is sort of setting out the ingredients for the poem. So the prompt gives you ideas on how to pull in some of those dreamy natures of the landscape, the senses, the characteristic of the landscape. And if you're just like have your own idea for how to tell your own Kansas story, that is great. But I'm going to and give you 2 quiet minutes to sort of try writing a little bit of something to try and connect some of the pieces that we've sort of started to build in those handouts or in your journal. And then I'll pop in to say my final thing about Kansas poems and stories. Ready, set, I'm going to be quiet. You probably need more than 2 minutes to write the poem or story that you want to write about your place in Kansas. But if you wrote a line that felt good to write or that you liked that came out of your pen or your keyboard, if you'd like to pop that into the chat, I'd like to um, read a few beautiful lines from people out there listening along. But the other reason I, one, I just can't help myself being a teacher and trying to have little activities as we go along. But the other reason I had people writing as we read poems is that the State Library of Kansas is inviting people to share your Kansas poem or story as part of the archive of this Kansas 250 bookshelf. Ray has put the link to submit in the chat if you want to save that, or you can use the QR code on your screen to open that submission portal so you can have that handy. So far, we only have one very beautiful contribution to the chat, which is Ryan saying the sky abstract, still seeping from fire. Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's not been great for my allergies, but it is visually so beautiful. I love burn season, actually. My son says that smell is what he identifies as the smell of home. Which I guess he's just born to be a poet. If the world on fire makes you think of home, you're either from Kansas or you're a poet or both. Oh, wow. Ryan put in the chat that he was part of a 12-man crew that burned 800 acres. It's a lot to manage. Oh, someone in the Lindsberg Library has shared with us from that group. We go driving, eating favorite barbecue, our destiny. I love the barbecue as destiny. What can you do with a handful of land? Feed a small family, have leftover tomatoes for everyone. Oh, you guys, we're so good. We're so good here in Kansas. Tasted Easter candy, the promise of Renaissance. We could just write our own collaborative story of Kansas right now. Barbecue and burning and Easter candy. Alyssa said, spiky balls from the sweet gum tree underfoot, squirrels everywhere. From the quiet cul-de-sac, I can still hear the highway, and at night, passing trains. Through still bare branches, I check the sky. Soon, lush leaves will overtake the view. Nice. Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you all for sharing this hour of your evenings. I know life is busy we got stuff to burn out here and kids to take to soccer practice. My dog's been begging to be walked for a while. And I thank you all for choosing to spend the hour logging online and sharing your lines with me, putting poems in the air with me, and helping, continue that story of Kansas that has been told through poems for hundreds of years here in this state. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Angela. It was a pleasure to be here with everybody and take a break. Now that it's cooled off, I can take the dog for that walk. Now that it's not 90 anymore. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ray, for inviting me to talk about poetry from March. And help save me from one more event in April, which is actually National Poetry Month. But it was nice to get a jump on National Poetry Month since I have 20 events next month. And so it's nice to hide one of these poetry talks in a March instead.
Well, thank you, Traci, for this wonderful session this evening. I also want to again acknowledge the Kansas Arts Commission for their support of the Poet Laureate program. And before everyone leaves, I just want Allie to speak up a few words about next month's event.
Yeah, hi. My name is Allie Lausch. I do marketing communications for the State Library of Kansas. I want to introduce you to the next virtual event, which is April 8th. It comes pretty quick because one of the presenters is about ready to have a grandchild. So it's the Scoop, Gardening with K-State Extension, a virtual conversation with Annie Baker and Greg Eyestone. They collectively have 40 years of experience Greg Eystone was a horticulture agent, it seems, in every town in Kansas. Annie Baker moved to Wyoming for a while, came back, and now coordinates master gardeners. These are fun people. I've known them for a while, and it should be fun. So, Wednesday, April 8th, 2026 at 7 p.m., you know the drill. I'll put it out on social media, and we've kind of given kind of hoping to incentivize libraries like the ones we have tonight to join us. So bring your thoughts, your questions, and be ready to get inspired. And again, we want to thank you for coming. It's been lovely to have you all.
Good night, everyone. And submit your poems and stories.